Well, I think for a long period of time, the region's enjoyed a lot of bank liquidity, and this is possibly the catalyst for many companies to start thinking about diversifying their funding sources. That the region's been one where all this liquidity has meant that they've enjoyed long-term bank relationships. But the fact is that much of this lending is actually short-term and uncommitted, even though it has a long-term nature. And so we think it's not a case of replacing bank funding, but just moving towards a more balanced funding approach. Because as we know, the bond and sukuk market's very underdeveloped in the region. And so we're seeing, especially on the corporate side now, many more CFOs starting to think more strategically about the way they fund, especially when they've got a lot of capex and long-term investment plans. And that makes absolute sense, and probably less of a sort of tactical approach to the marginal cost of credit, thinking more strategically about the ability to bear for example, a couple of 100 basis points. Is something that can be borne if it makes strategic sense for the company. Well, I think we're certainly seeing plenty of demand for fixed income. I think the real issue though is transitioning that away from being dominated by the banks, who tend to be holding to maturity. And I think there's strong policymaker regulatory interest in this as well, especially with Basel III coming into force. Seeing, as I mentioned before, more transition of term lending by banks into the sukuk market. And so one of the mechanisms there to help that process are more ratings. To date, we're seeing a lot of unrated local currency issuance, especially in markets like Saudi. So from our point of view, we see ratings as a way to help diversify that investor base. But as it stands today, there certainly seems to be plenty of demand. I guess there are many conferences around the region, but what we like about this event is that it's one that's certainly very focused on the regional market rather than specific countries, and certainly looking at the size of the participation, many from the UAE as you'd expect, but also from around the rest of MENA, and I think there's a lot of interesting discussion and debate, and as we had this morning, a great debate on the bond markets versus syndicated loan markets. So I think yes, great discussion between different participants across the market. The experiences of issuers, the views of all the different intermediaries and investors, and of course investors are often the most important component of this. But the way in which it balances, I guess, also the sort of the short-term tactical transaction focus against the sort of the more strategic long-term options. So in that sense, I think sort of a great sort of melting pot of views. We view conferences as an important component of our marketing and outreach plans. So it's a case of selecting which ones sort of optimize our profile and have the content that certainly suits our agenda, and this is certainly one that delivers that for us.